This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. Storm waters have receded and many have returned to their homes and businesses, and now the real work begins, and we talk about recovery efforts, including the special session of the General Assembly next week. Almost forgotten has been the fact that in fewer than 40 days, we're going to hold the so-called Blue Moon elections. We want to discuss the campaigns, the candidates, the issues, and the significance of this November 6th vote. And we won't wrap up until we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of the panel, joining us this week is former Congressman, former Superintendent of the Department of Public Instruction, and former legislator Bob Etheridge, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, our senior political analyst, and I do mean senior political analyst, and Joe Mavretic, the former NC House Speaker. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages by our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Production underwriting support provided in part by the more than 65,000 members of the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Let's get started. East of I-95, one of the more common sights you'll see is furniture, appliances, and debris on the sides of the road as people affected by Hurricane Florence put out their belongings. What you most frequently encounter, however, is a quiet determination from these residents to restore their lives as quickly as possible, and a wave of volunteers, many from other states, coming to help remove tree limbs, muck out homes, and offer encouragement to those affected by one of the worst storms in our state's history. Our legislature is set to convene next week to begin addressing these critical needs. Joe Mavretic, Governor Cooper originally wanted them to convene October 9th so that his administration could have time to really put a request to them that was meaningful. They wanted to come back, however, on October 2nd. Was this gotcha politics like we've been seeing recently, or were there legitimate reasons for them needing to come back earlier?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, you got to watch this dance because it's a really good one going on right now. Think back to Matthew and the General Assembly's criticisms of the governor and his responses to Matthew. So the governor says, I want you all to come to town 8 or 9 October and we'll get on with this and I'll give you a good plan. They say, oh, no. So we'd like to be before you. So we think we'll come in on the 2nd. And so they're going to come in on the 2nd. And remember now, they have to justify putting all that money in the rainy day fund. And also, let's not forget that it is just 40 days before the election. And so this is a dance to see who can capture news between now and the election.
But Bob, they said that one of the reasons why they want to do this is that they want to make sure teachers, particularly in those school districts that were closed, get paid properly. They also want to modify school calendars so that they don't have to fulfill, what is it, the 185 days that they're supposed to. But couldn't this have waited until October 9th?
Sure. I mean, come on, give me a break. You know, Joe knows as well as I do that it's a political ploy. They could have done it just as easy when you get back. They're sitting on almost $2 billion in a rainy day fund. What they
It's been raining.
Yeah, and it's been raining. But we need to take a good plan that's well thought out, work together. We need money for the schools. Farmers are hurting. Communities are devastated. I mean, if you drew a line from 64 through the edges of Wake County and go down through Hope, that whole area is in deep, deep devastation.
Chris, the estimation is that this was a $50 billion impact, and particularly for our farmers. $1 billion lost revenues to our farmers. Was this the worst storm we've seen in North Carolina?
Certainly seemed like it in terms of finance. You know, I don't know if we adjusted Hazel's damage for inflation, what that would be like, but it's certainly the worst in all of our, I think, recent history. And the question now, I think the big question isn't even what happens in this session. I do think that will be the combination of people with goodwill and people trying to score political points. But 6 months from now, when there's still not rental housing in low-income areas in Craven County where people live, that's not going to be rebuilt because the developers don't have the money or don't think they can do it. Or, I mean, this is a long-term, this is always a frustrating thing with these storms. We're talking about it now, thank goodness, and we'll hope we'll still be talking about it 6 months from now, because the test of recovery is not just what happens the week after the storm or the month after the storm or the political session after the storm. It's really 6 and 9 months. Are the farmers back to some semblance of normal with their families and their lives? Are people who didn't own houses, who lived in, even had housing, public housing assistance, where some of those places are wiped. Those are wiped out, right? Who's going to rebuild this? It just doesn't. You don't make a lot of profit on those, so those developers need help to build them so people can afford to live in them.
And Chris makes a good point, John. The good news: we have been flooded with people who are volunteers who are coming from out of state, many from other states that are affected by storms, but sometimes Midwestern states, who are coming in here and helping us to try to clean up. The question is, what happens when these folks leave?
Well, this is critically important to think about. This is a noble enterprise. It's the best of America being exhibited at the moment here in the Carolinas. But there's a difference between the immediate reaction and the long-term needs. Whether the legislative session was held on October 2nd or 9th or 16th, it's way too early to know the full effect and the proper use of the rainy day fund. That's going to take some time to figure out. Remember, the rainy day fund is partly for the purpose of natural disasters, but you don't want to deplete it entirely in case there's a recession that hits our general revenue uptake. The other thing is we need to think very clearly about what's a state responsibility, what's a private responsibility, what's going to be covered by insurance, what's not. For example, there's going to be dispute about this, but the biggest environmental effect has always been during storms and was here municipal waste. Yeah. Okay, not hog lagoons, that's worth considering. Not a coal ash, definitely not the main issue. It's municipal waste. Those are traditionally local responsibilities, but what if a community, either because they lack the resources or lack the expertise, fails to maintain its wastewater treatment plant properly? That affects people downriver. That becomes a regional or statewide issue. That's the kind of thing we're not going to resolve on October 2nd.
But Joe, John raises a good point. You guys are helping me segue so well this week. John raises a good point. We keep talking about municipal waste treatment facilities get flooded all the time. We keep talking about NC-12 out on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We keep talking about bridges every time we have a storm. We're not doing anything about our infrastructure, are we?
Well, thank you for that segue into my comments, Tom. We have got a really good plan for before a storm and during a storm. What North Carolina doesn't have is a plan for what happens after the storm. And this particular storm, I think, is going to give us the reason to sit down in the long run and talk about what North Carolina is going to do as a state over a 3 to 12 month time frame after a natural disaster. Our current disaster plan is a model for every state in the country. But we don't have that plan for what's going to happen in the long run. And I have a belief that this time we're going to do that.
I hope you're right, because I mean, and the folks on the Outer Banks have got to have an artery to be able to connect, and NC-12 is it. But it seems like we rebuild that road.
Well, NC-12 should not continue to be repaved and graded. We ought to have an access highway raised like the Florida does
down
to
in the
Key
Florida
West,
Keys.
to Key West.
And I'm not picking on those folks down there, but Bob, another aspect of this, we have property down on the coast. We had people coming in knocking on doors wanting to do work to help restore us. There were a lot of instances of price gouging going on, people taking advantage. Anything we can do to stop that?
Well, of course, that's always a challenge anytime you have a major disaster. The Attorney General's involved, the Governor's office is involved, local folks are involved. But let me touch on something Joe just said, because I think it's important as we talk about the mitigation that comes after a storm. Congress is now in the process of passing, I think the House just passed this week, as it relates to the Stafford funds, Joe. Those are funds that are used for mitigation. Historically, you couldn't
flood insurance program.
Well, and it's tied to FEMA mitigation as well. Where you could only build back to the standard you had at the time the facility was there. They're going to allow it to be moved to the 21st century standard. That is a step in the right direction for a long time. It's been worked on. Finally, I think we're going to get it through. Now, that being said, it's still going to be expensive. It's going to be long. And the people down east, not only just those who have businesses and our schools and our communities, but also the rural communities, those small towns and our farmers, they're going to be devastated if we don't stay locked up with funds for a long time.
How is this going to affect our elections? We're going to talk about the elections in a few minutes, but I mean, the absentee ballots supposedly are out. And I mean, are people going to be focusing on that at all?
I think there are a couple things. One is that there's immediate implications in some areas for polling places and getting people to the polls, and how and do they have the resources to make sure they have the normal outreach efforts and have polls open and have poll workers. It's hard to be a volunteer for a poll worker when your family's house has been destroyed. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, as you mentioned, is the distraction. It's not the most important thing in somebody's life who doesn't have a place to live or is worried about their financial outcome as to who to vote for. So it'll be interesting to see. And I'm not sure we know yet, and I don't want to always bring politics into something. I don't think we have any idea what it means for each political party. And we'll talk about that next segment.
Well, that was the next question.
Right. I don't think we know.
All right.
Well, I do. I think that the Republicans in eastern North Carolina have a pretty good base. And I think what they do and say in the short session in the early October is going to resonate.
Well, on the other hand, the governor's been down there 50 times and has been on TV, and a lot of people who might not have liked him said, "Well, the governor's doing a good job."
Right, y'all are getting ahead of me here. We're going to talk about the elections in a minute. I want to talk about John. I want to talk about FEMA. When President Trump was here at Cherry Point a week or so ago, he virtually said, "We're opening the pocketbooks of the federal government, and you folks are going to get all." What do you think of? What kind of relief do you really think we're going to get from FEMA?
I think that FEMA will probably react the way it has typically reacted in recent storms. I think the president was saying things that sounded good in his head, and that is traditionally what President Trump does, but we shouldn't take it all that seriously. I think the federal government is going to be responsive, as they have been in recent disasters in other states and in our state. The challenge again will be how quickly is that money spent in North Carolina. That was the political dispute about Matthew, was not that the federal government didn't ultimately pay a lot of money into the state, but the argument was at least that under Cooper's administration it wasn't being spent.
But we
quickly.
mentioned on the show a couple of weeks ago that perhaps some of the reasoning for that was the fact that North Carolina has rules and regulations so far as spending some of this money that perhaps other states doesn't
and which
have.
means we
Do you
need
think
to
our
learn.
legislature might be willing to change some of that, Bob?
Tom, I think at the federal level and at the state level, if they really want to help people, get to the point Joe made, help these communities move quickly, they've got to reduce the bureaucracy, go more to block grants, hold the state accountable. Joan Assembly can do it very quickly. Yes, it's long term, but if you're out there and you've lost your home, you've lost everything, the furniture, you have nothing left, they don't want to wait 6 or 8, 10 months.
We've got a good friend down in Pamlico County, Dale Lee's a farmer down there, and I was talking to him this past week. He said half our tobacco crop never got harvested. It's gone.
And that's where the money is, the top half.
we worked round the clock shortly before the storm and got about 80% of the corn crop out. But he said soybeans, forget it. Cotton, forget it. They're gone. So it's going to have to be a situation in which the help is going to have to come fairly quickly, and that leads us into the next subject, which is politics. So Labor Day traditionally is the kickoff for election campaigns, but no sooner did we come back from that holiday than we were staring down the barrel of Florence. Since September 14th, politics has taken a back seat, but in less than 40 days, the polls will open, and we're going to select new congressional representatives, statewide appellate court judges, legislators, and we've got 6 proposed constitutional amendments. Bob Etheridge, many are focusing on these congressional elections, and there has been some conversation that our predominantly Republican delegation in Congress might not be quite so much that way come January. In fact, there's an article that says we might flip 3 seats this year. I want to know you serve the 2nd District of North Carolina, and that's one of them that's in play. How likely do you view this possibility?
I think it's very possible. I think it's going to depend on several things. Turnout, certainly resources, but I think folks are tired of seeing the gridlock, nothing happening. And John touched on a little bit ago. You know, the president's out there making a lot of noise, talking. There are a lot of folks down east expecting to see some results. If they don't see something happen, they're going to hold somebody accountable. If I promise money and I don't deliver it, they remember that.
But of course, that's not going to take place before November 2nd.
No, but it'll have an impact, John, and I think the turnout's going to make a difference. I think there is a possibility for at least 2, maybe 3 to flip North Carolina.
Tom, let me look at this from a different angle. We've had, I don't know how many court cases about congressional redistricting in North Carolina ad nauseum, but let's assume that Bob's right, that there's a 3 congressional flip-flop. What does that...
Flop may not be the right term.
What does that say about the redistricting cases when the Democrats now have won 3 more seats in Congress? Does that kind of skew all this argument about...
Interesting.
No, because it's been 10 years since they drew all the districts. So the argument would be, they drew the districts at the beginning of the decade. Demographic changes changed.
But then they redrew them in 2016.
Right, but the point is that districts change. It doesn't mean just because they were gerrymandered, it doesn't mean that districts don't evolve.
I think that could have been a good argument, Chris, if you were talking about the districts that were drawn in 2011.
Yes.
So that can be a good argument, but in this case, I think you're chasing the wrong dog.
All of the districts have not changed dramatically.
The better argument would be that gerrymandering takes you only so far. If you've got remember, Republicans won both houses of the General Assembly. They picked up congressional seats in 2010 under districts that they did not draw. So it isn't just about timing, it's also about sometimes you have a significant wave election and it washes over the district lines. If the Democrats pick up seats, on the one hand, as Joe says, some Republicans say, see, the gerrymandering must not have been so bad. But some Republicans will also think, if the Democrats are in charge of the General Assembly in 2021, then they might gerrymander it back, and that might actually convince them to be more in favor of reform, not less.
Bob,
I also think there's another issue, Tom, and that's the energy. You know, which side has the most energy?
Well, I was getting ready to say, Carter Wren, of course, has been Congressman George Holdings' campaign manager since Fido was a pup.
He understands that.
And he understands politics, but he says the fear that he has is that a lot of the independent voters who perhaps would have shown up previously to vote for George Holding, their dislike of Trump is going to be such, either they will not come to the polls or they'll vote Democratic. And you know that district as well as anybody.
And I think there's some truth in that. And I think there are a lot of independent voters who are really turned off by some of the things they've seen. Yeah, because the independent tends to be that swing voter that makes a big difference.
Sometimes it is.
Well, I don't think, I disagree with Bob that they tend to be, they are. In North Carolina, independents have to vote for a Democrat or a Republican candidate, but the truth is that the independents are the swing vote in this state, and they're going to be the swing vote in this state for at least the next decade.
Chris, one of the districts that is certainly in play is the 9th District. Robert Pittenger was the congressman there, got defeated in the primary by Mark Harris, and now is facing a challenger in Dan McCready, and the polls show McCready is up by 7 points. Handicap that race
I think
for
this
us.
is the most, I think there are 3 in play, but this is the one the Democrats are not quite counting on, but almost. This is the most likely one to flip, I think, and it probably helped the Democrats that Mark Harris won the primary. He's an evangelical conservative, and some of this district is in Charlotte. So this is really going to be the sort of the urban part of the district in Charlotte versus the more rural areas. But McCready is not running as a traditionally liberal Democrat either. I think he's trying to be a sort of a moderate centrist, has a military background. He's sort of the perfect candidate for this district.
The other district that they consider perhaps in play is the 13th, and that's when you've got Ted Budd, who is running for his first reelection against Kathy Manning. The polls show Manning ahead by 4 points for whatever it's worth at this particular time period. Budd is a member of the House Freedom Caucus. He's running, he says, on his record. How impressive is his record in 2 years?
Well, he's a first-term member, but for people who are likely to vote for Republican congressional candidates in a midterm election, his record is impressive. I mean, this is, as it would be for anybody that has voted the way he has voted. Interestingly, Budd is a first-termer running for re-election. Mark Harris is a replacement. He won the primary. These are candidates that are, for the Republicans, more vulnerable because they haven't been elected and re-elected multiple times. People aren't as familiar with them. I think that's why one of the reasons George Holding is not quite as vulnerable.
Joe, one of the issues that the Republicans put on the ballot, these 6 constitutional amendments, which, by the way, a recent poll shows, the Elon poll shows, people don't even know anything about them hardly. But they put them on the ballot so that they'd turn out their base. The ads have already started running. One of them says all former chief justices and all former governors oppose these amendments. That's been challenged as not being true because the governors don't oppose all of the amendments, or the justices don't oppose all of the amendments. Is that going to backfire?
Well, to some extent, with some people. Let's face it, when you get into campaigning before a general election, you ought not to believe everything that everybody's saying about what's going on. In my opinion, some of the constitutional amendments may fail, other ones are going to pass. But what's interesting is that if you look at North Carolina's history, we've had something like 140 amendments over 90 years, and the people have approved the overwhelming majority of them. We've had times when we had 7 or more amendments up for the people, so I don't think there's any unique case.
Tom, it's worth pointing out that ad was false, and they took it down.
Yes.
So they have withdrawn the ad and changed it so
on Thursday. So
that it's more specific to the fact the governor's only opposed 2 of the
Chris,
amendments.
we're running out of time, I'm afraid, on this segment. I got to get to tell us something we don't know. But I want to ask you about the legislative races, because all 170 seats in the legislature are up. The Democrats have been hoping to at least eliminate the veto-proof majorities in the House and the Senate, perhaps maybe even flip the House. What's your projection?
I think there are 3 levels here. I think first of all, I think it's very likely they'll break the veto-proof majority, the supermajority in the House. That would be, I think it would be a terrible year if the Democrats didn't. Winning the House, or breaking the supermajority in the Senate is much tougher. Winning the House is even much tougher. I think it would have to be a wave election year for them to do all 3 of those things. Not impossible, and no matter how we look at it, Donald Trump is the issue in the election, which doesn't make sense at the General Assembly, but it's true about enthusiasm and what everybody's talking about.
Well, I am going to enthusiastically switch over and ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, tell us something.
There were 2 polls that came out last week on North Carolina's elections, including legislative elections, and among other things, they had very different results. The High Point University poll had the generic ballot for legislature basically tied. The Civitas poll had the Democrats up by about 6 points. This illustrates the uncertainty in this cycle.
Bob Etheridge, tell us something we don't know.
You know, we talk about the problems down east with our folks, farmers and others. Wall Street Journal just put out a piece. In the Midwest, farmlands are dropping. They're predicting that the number of farms that's going to be lost in the Midwest will equal what we had in the 1980s. Wow. That wave is coming east.
Joe Mavretic, tell us something we don't know.
I was really impressed with the governor's performance in Florence. and I think I'm going to be more impressed with his performance after Florence, getting everybody together for the long run.
I hope you're right about that.
Good.
Politics is all about timing. One of the luckiest people in Raleigh these days is Speaker Tim Moore. There are two scandals on the front page of the News and Observer. One about an attorney's contract he got with somebody he helped with legislation. The second, getting his girlfriend a job, and nobody's talking about it because of the Supreme Court hearings.
Well, there you go. And we didn't even get on that. We'll talk about that later. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week with more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Production underwriting support provided in part by the more than 65,000 members of the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.